I was joined by Mr. Marquise Harris Dawson. He disappeared on me. There he is. Okay, so we do have a quorum. So, Mr. Clerk, why don't we begin? Again, this is Friday, the June 17th. I want to welcome everybody to the council chambers. Mr. Clerk, why don't we start off? Let's go with our consent items.
Okay. Would you like those items read into the record, sir?
Please.
Okay. And item number 1 is a city administrative officer report relative to a proposed ballot measure regarding Los Angeles Airport Police enrollment in the Los Angeles Fire and Police Pension Plan and discussion of the actuarial impact of the proposed measure upon future annual costs. Item number 2 is communications from the city clerk and the city attorney, certificate of sufficiency of ordinance initiative, resolutions and ordinances relative to a certified initiative petition regarding affordable housing and labor standards related to city planning.
I can't make that. All right, good enough. Okay, those two items, Mr. Harris Dawson, I think we can move on consent if you're comfortable with that. So, without objection.
There's no cards on this? There are no cards.
Okay, so we will move forward with that, with the recommendation being for November on, I guess that's item 2. So with that said, without objection, these items will be deemed approved. That brings us where, Mr. Clerk?
I believe that brings us to item number 4. That's a city administrative officer and chief legislative analyst reports relative to funding options to address homelessness, including the steps necessary to place a measure on the next general or city election ballot to raise new revenue needed to address homelessness. Homelessness and Poverty Committee took various actions on this matter on May 25th.
Okay, if I could get the CAO and CLA and our to come forward. Welcome back, Mr. CAO. Why don't you begin?
Certainly. Good morning. At the direction of the Homeless and Poverty Committee, our 2 offices submitted an additional report clarifying the different issues related to the options for potential revenue sources, including a parcel tax, a geo bond, and a few other items. In our report, we do recommend that your committee consider pursuing further the parcel tax, the sales tax, and the geo bond. At this point in time, we do not have enough information related to a billboard tax, marijuana tax, and documentary transfer tax, so we recommend that those items be held for the March 2017 election if your council were to consider them.
You were so riveting, you broke my mic. So why don't, could you, end that again, because I missed the last sentence because of my technical difficulty.
Certainly. So again, we were asked to pursue, to evaluate a number of measures, including a general obligation bond, a parcel tax, a sales tax, a billboard tax, marijuana, and documentary transfer tax. Based on the analysis that we've done, looking at the pros and cons and the limitations and the ability to fund the various elements of the homeless program that your council has adopted. At this point in time, should your committee choose to pursue any one of these items, we recommend that for the November ballot, you consider the GO bond, parcel tax, or sales tax. As it relates to the billboard tax, marijuana tax, and documentary tax, we need additional research and analysis, and so if your council were to consider those, we recommend waiting until the March 7, 2017 election.
At the back of our report, John Wickham with the CLA, at the back of our report, we identify the policy issues that the council would need to make decisions on in order to advance something forward. So the city attorney would need instructions on how to draft the ordinance and possibly a resolution of necessity. And they would need detailed information on how to draft that ordinance. And so at the back of our report, we've identified those policy points where the committee, the council would need to make some decisions if you choose to advance something forward. And we would be prepared to answer any questions on those if you like.
Okay, thank you, John. So, Mr. Harris Dawson, I have some cards. Maybe we can do these first, and then we can engage with Mr. Wickham and Mr. Santana. So if I could get Jerry Jones, and it's Alan Greenlee. I can't make out the first name, but the last name is Coe. And then Marie Ramsey. Please come forward. Yes.
Hi. My name is Jerry Jones.
Oh, wait, let me stop you. We've been joined by Mr. Weezar. So the Rules Committee, we are all here, all present. Go right ahead, sir.
Thank you. My name is Jerry Jones. I'm with the Intercity Law Center, and I want to thank the Rules Committee for taking up this measure. Intercity Law Center strongly supports moving forward on additional ballot measures to resource homeless programs in November. We think the GO bond as well as the parcel tax are very good options. If it's a bond, we would encourage at a minimum a $1.1 billion bond. We think that the council should be expansive and think about a lot more money than that, but certainly more resources will help us deal with the crisis on the streets. And polling shows that voters in Los Angeles want to see this problem dealt with. And so we will do everything we can working with other homeless providers to get out the vote and build support for whatever you put on the November ballot. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. So if I could have the next speaker, please come forward and identify yourself.
Good morning, Mr. President. My name is Alan Greenlee. I'm the Executive Director of the Southern California Association of Nonprofit Housing. Many of my members are engaged in the business of owning and operating affordable housing, particularly for homeless populations. On behalf of my 280 member organizations, we'd like to express our support for the administrative officer's recommendation to put an initiative on the ballot in the fall. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Next.
Good morning, Chris Coe, Director of Systems and Innovation at United Way. President Weston, members of the committee, thank you so much for moving these items forward. It's the single biggest issue that the city strategies left and that the city residents have been asking for leadership on, so we thank you for the leadership you're showing this morning. In particular, we would say with the options to add some detail with the bond itself, we would ask that it be at least the highest option listed by the CAO at $1.5 billion for a couple reasons. That would be the need to satisfy the 4% tax credits that the strategies also talk about needing to leverage. It also would add in, would leave room for the flexibility for the affordable housing mix needed to complete some of these supportive housing developments. So we'd say $1.5 billion, and there's support in the business community for even higher than that to build the 10,000 units of supportive housing we need per year. And the parcel, we would say at least at the $120 million mark for the gap without subsidies listed. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Marie, followed by Alicia Witzlick and Mr. Previn, Eric Previn. Hi.
Hi, good morning, sir. Marie Rumsey here on behalf of the Central City Association. We are also here to thank you for your leadership on this critical issue and to thank the City Administrative Office and the Chief Legislative Analyst for all their good work. We are supportive of the General Obligation Bond. We think that is the best option to go forward, and we hope you'll continue this good work. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome.
Hi, Alicia Witzling with LA Chamber. On behalf of the Chamber, I wanted to commend you guys for the great work that you've been doing with the CAO's office on addressing homelessness. The Chamber has been interested in this issue through our partnership with the United Way on Home for Good for the last few years, and it's been pretty unprecedented what the city has been suggesting here. We'd like to voice our support for the housing bond, the general obligation bond, with at least $1.5 billion as the highest number that the CAO's office has indicated they can go, for the reasons that my colleague Chris Coe had mentioned before. This is the time for action. We've never seen such public support for action to end homelessness. The cost of inaction is mounting, and we think this would be a really good option for the voters. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Previn.
Good morning, Council President Wesson. It's Eric Previn speaking on behalf of myself. I'm also supportive of this effort to get a general obligation bond going on this affordable housing issue. And I want to also ask this body to consider the other. I know we have been pushing in Sacramento to get the millionaire small tax above a certain amount of money going, and the governor has not been cooperative. And I don't know what the governor is expecting us to do in Southern California. We have a serious crisis, so I appreciate that this is one of the options. There are other options that the Board of Supervisors looked at. You know, there are 4 main options. I don't have time in the 1 minute to go over them, but I think we have to play every card we have to get some relief, some financial investment into the solutions, not the enforcement, Mr. Weezar, Mr. Marquise Harris Dawson. We must stay focused on facilitating a place for these people. Thank you.
Thank you. If I could get Mr. Dave Martin and Brenna Norton, please come forward. Mr. Martin, please come forward. Brenna Norton, Brenna, please come forward. Yes, sir.
Yeah, hi, my name is Dave Martin. I'm a resident of Skid Row, and I'm here to ask that Measure 16-0047 be put on the November ballot. We have a huge problem downtown. There's a lot of people living on the street in tents, and the problem is just getting worse and worse every day. And these people really do need some place to live in order to get them off the street and alleviate some of the congestion that's on the sidewalk. Plus, too, there's problems with, litter. These people throw stuff in the street, their trash, and it's bringing all kinds of undesirable little critters around. And so I really am for this measure. It could really help a lot of people in the long run.
Thank you. Ms. Norton.
Good morning. On the DWP reform effort, I know there's going to be a conversation today. I would recommend that the City Council, Brenna Norton with Food and Water Watch, so used to coming up here now, remove the section on completely giving away oversight of power contracts.
We're not on that item right now.
Surprised that you called me so early.
Oh,
Okay.
well, then maybe I mixed up the card, so I'm so sorry
it's
about
all right.
that. So I will not forget you, though. Okay, I have another card. I can't make out who it is. If you want me to call your name, why don't you just fill out the card so that it can be read? Elizabeth Conway? Is your name Elizabeth Conway?
No,
and would you please get away from the...
It was a name that
no,
you couldn't
is your
read.
name Elizabeth Conway?
No, sir.
Then I did not call you. So if I could have Elizabeth Conway, please come forward.
Sir, this is for a later agenda item.
Okay. It says 4. All right. Then that concludes public comment on this item.
I had a card item.
You are disrupting this meeting.
Brown Act file.
No, okay, you will be removed if you shout out again. If you want to be called on, give me a card that I can read. Okay, so where it relates to that, now, you are disrupting. It was a year ago that, about a year ago, that this council declared that homelessness was, if not the number one issue facing the city, it would definitely be in the top tier. It was also at that time that we were determined and committed to try to do something to address that issue. And there have been a lot of conversations, a lot of fruitful discussions, and that basically members bring us to this point. Now, in my opinion, this is so important that every second, every minute, every day that we can give ourselves to continue to vet this issue, I think that it's in our best interest to do that. I think it's also important that we not allow ourselves to be rushed by deadlines that we did not set. I think that the people of this city are counting on us, and we in turn will be counting on the humanity of the residents of the city of Los Angeles. So I'm going to be recommending a somewhat unconventional approach moving forward. And what that would be is that I would ask my colleagues to support moving forward not one issue, but two. That would give us additional time. In fact, can I get the CAO and CLA to come back? I think that gives us more time to ask more questions, seek more input. What is the deadline that we as a council have to take action in order to place something on the ballot?
Good morning.
Good morning.
Yolanda Chavez with the CAO's office. In order to meet the deadlines, because of council recess, you would have to make a decision by July 1st. So you would have to approve the ballot language, have the first reading by July 1st.
That would be for both items, the ordinances for both items. A GO bond also requires a resolution of necessity, and the resolution of necessity needs to be adopted 2 days prior to July 1st. So by June 29th on the GO bond for the resolution of necessity, and then the ordinances themselves can come on July 1st.
Well, what I recommend, members, is that this committee support moving forward the housing bond and the parcel tax, and that we, on the record, indicate to the residents of this city that we will ultimately only place one of these items on the ballot. But if we act today, schedule a conversation in council this Tuesday, that still gives us a few days before the end of the month to make adjustments in the event that we want to make adjustments. So that would be my recommendation. And that again, if we do that, things that we might want to tweak, we would have time to do it. Things that we might want to add, things that we might want to subtract, gives us that wiggle room. So if I could get Mr. Santana to come back and have you guys stay, I'd like to open it up to my colleagues and get a feel for your thoughts. Mr. Huizar?
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, I support your idea of moving forward with a bond and a parcel tax for the purpose of our colleagues on the council to fully vet the pros and cons of each option. But where I am is I support a bond. I think after looking at this for several months, having discussions with the public, working with Mr. Marquise Harris-Dawson and yourself and others, and listening to the discussion, it seems that that would get us to better address our comprehensive strategic plan that we developed over a year. If you look at the comprehensive strategic plan and the needs identified in that plan, the optimal way for us to get there is to maximize the amount of bond that we think the public could appetite at this time. And as proposed here, the committee suggesting a $1 billion bond, but I think given every poll that I've seen, homelessness is at the top of the list of what people want to see. And given my experience in passing 3 bonds at the school district, optimizing to the most of a need, to a need that people see, I think the public has the appetite for a $1.5 billion bond. So that's kind of where I am. So I support the idea of going forward to get additional input to see where the rest of our colleagues are. But on the bond as been proposed here, on the recommendations, this is not a homelessness bond. This is an affordable housing bond, and I think there's a difference. So, for example, what's being proposed here is to provide housing for AMI at 0 to 30%, 31 to 50%, and 51 to 80%. That is an affordable housing bond. That is not a homelessness bond. And if we were to have sat here a year ago and said we're going to address affordable housing, this would be a great way to move forward. But unfortunately, and I'm looking to staff to correct me, if we move forward with the way the bond is being proposed, it leaves homelessness out. There would be $0 for our homeless. And can someone answer for me, if you look at AMI and you say that housing will be available to anybody between an AMI of 0 to 80, what does that mean? Who will qualify for that?
So if you look at, Councilman, we provided an income table for you, but I think to respond in the report on page 12, but I think to respond to your question, I think the policy decision on the income levels that the housing would serve is up to you. And normally when we talk about our homeless population, we're looking at the extremely low income category at from 0 to 30% of the area median income. So you really have to provide the direction to the city attorney in terms of how the ballot language should be drafted, so that you would say the proceeds from the bonds or the parcel tax would serve individuals and families up to what income level, right? And I guess we would only ask, I mean, overall the city has a crisis, not only homelessness, but overall affordability. And if this is a 10-year effort and there are other resources coming from the state, I think you want to provide yourself with some flexibility, because we're going to be assessing every year, right,
Okay.
in terms of the need.
So answer me this, though. When we say we want to provide funding for homeless, do we calculate who qualifies for homeless housing based on AMI?
Yes.
We do. And what is that?
So most homeless individuals and families are probably at 0 to 30% of AMI, so extremely low.
Extremely
income.
low. So that's how we calculate. So we find a homeless person and we say, you qualify for housing based upon your condition, your qualifications.
Your
It'll be
income.
0 to 30, right?
Yes, but let me just add something else, that because of the affordability crisis, you may have working families that may be a little higher level, right, even up to 80%, that may also find themselves homeless. They just can't afford rents. So we have a big problem, and of course it depends on the individual situation, but chronically homeless are typically at 0 to 30%
It's 0
of
to
AMI.
30. But the chronically homeless, in each one of those, as we define the 0 to 30 AMI, each one already has a category of one person, two person, three
Right.
persons, and we calculate those within the 0 to 30.
Right.
So we could leave it at 0 to 30.
Right.
And I understand if we want to put something out there to discuss, but my concern is that we have such a homeless crisis and an affordable housing crisis. But all the research and discussions and what we've talked about up to date has been about addressing homelessness. And if we leave this too broad, although there's a huge need out there, there's a day for us to address affordable housing and those other categories and develop the data, the research, and everything else. Up until today, we've been talking about homelessness. So I understand leaving it broad so that we could have those discussions, but my preference would be that we leave it at 0 to 30 AMI because we've been looking to focus on addressing those most chronic homeless, those that have been more difficult to address. And if we leave it open all the way up to 80 AMI, which that brings it, it's still a need for affordable housing, but that is all the way up to a single person making 48,000, which we need to provide more housing for. But all these discussions we've had was about those most in need. And so I understand that. So if we move forward for purposes of discussion, we would not leave out the chronic homeless if we include language for 0 to 30, right? We don't have them qualify under a different set of rules. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Councilman, one way of looking at it is that what the initiative allows versus what you end up doing. So, if you're seeking some flexibility, then you want to have a broader definition. Ultimately, the projects that your council funds are determined on an annual basis or on a project-by-project basis based on policies and the various direction that you provide. So it's really about the size of the envelope, and then the individual projects will fall within that size.
Yeah.
So they're prioritized by you.
And to that point, if you have a Citizens Oversight Committee, Administrative Oversight Committee, and ultimately the council's direction on how the policy is to allocate those funds, you would maintain the flexibility, but have the ability yourself to ensure your highest priorities.
Oh, okay. And my second question is, for a first-time home buyer assistance program, can we use bond funds for that?
It actually depends on where we end up on the legal decisions. As you know, we've had these discussions about the fact the city may have to own the properties or the units. So if we're not able to provide the funding just like we do now in terms of loans to either developers or first-time homeowners, then we could not use it for homeownership because in theory the city would have to own the land or the units.
Okay, how about the parcel tax?
The parcel tax is very flexible.
So we could use it for the first time?
You could use it for homeownership, and there would be no income restriction. I mean, as well, no income restrictions. You could also use it for services, operations, and maintenance.
Okay.
Which you can use the bonds for.
Okay. Well, thank you. Well, I think that for purposes of discussion, I'll support the council president's idea of moving forward with both. But again, I think the work that we've seen, the need that's out there, the polling that we've done, a $1.5 billion bond at this time, the public has the appetite for that, and the way people are expressing themselves in the public are that we need to serve those in most need now, and the lower 0 to 30 AMI would make sense at this time. That's my opinion. But, Mr. President, as a means of moving forward, it makes sense to move this whole package forward and then figure it out in council.
Okay. Mr. Harris-Dawson.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Weezar, and everybody that came today to testify, and folks who have been coming to our Homelessness and Poverty Committee, this committee, and various council sessions to engage in the discussion around homelessness. in the city of Los Angeles. We're very happy to make the achievement of setting a strategic plan. I got the full support of the council and the mayor alongside Los Angeles County. Out of that plan, if you look at both plans together, really what rests firmly in the responsibility of the city is housing homeless folks. Like my colleague, Mr. Weezar, and I think most of the members of the Homelessness and Poverty Committee, we spent a long time on this and have gone through a process, and so we have, I think, a more fully formed and firm opinion. I certainly am of the belief that a general obligation bond is the option of first resort. I think as high as we can get it is also the option of first resort. I do believe that there can be some space for housing that is not aimed at people who are currently homeless or on the verge of homelessness. But I think we have to have a lot of room to do that. And with $750 million being the number that we need for permanent supportive housing, I want to think about that as a baseline for permanent supportive housing, because the market is not going to create permanent supportive housing ever. I mean, it's just our market isn't set up to do that. It does not generate profit in that sense. The cost of land in our county, and so my understanding is that what the chair of the committee has put forward allows us the flexibility to figure out the mix later. But I do think it's important that we get there. Do we bind ourselves? Does any of this bind ourselves to cover all these categories, or cover them equally, or do anything like that?
No, not at all. You would be able to develop your priorities annually.
And from a legal standpoint, if we were to, not today, but between now and the time we vote, set benchmarks, is that consistent with what bond counsel was telling us what we can do?
Benchmarks in terms of...
In other words, to say we want to make sure we get at least this many permanent supportive housing units, and we want to get at least this many at the very low and this many at the low. Is that inside the range of our authority?
If you want to do that, you can. You would need to provide that instruction to the city attorney with those benchmarks. The city attorney would not be able to set those benchmarks for you, so the council would need to provide that in their instruction to the city attorney when drafting the ordinance.
Well, I would actually maybe advise that those benchmarks be in the annual plan, right, in terms of how you spend the proceeds, because the way that we would issue bonds, it would be based on the projects that are ready to finance. So annually, you would know which projects are ready to finance, and you would know exactly how many units you funded and the type of units, so that for the following year, you could reprioritize. So in terms of, so that every year you know what benchmarks you're meeting, and you could change your annual plan on priorities based on that.
And one of the concepts in the comprehensive homeless strategy is to provide more rapid rehousing and housing solutions before people become homeless, or immediately as they become homeless, to prevent them from becoming chronically homeless. And the intention there is to reduce the demand for permanent supportive housing. We know the longer that people are on the street, the more likely they're going to need advanced services in order to address some of the issues that develop in their lives. And so if you have more of an effort on those prevention strategies, it may be that you reduce the demand for permanent supportive housing in the future. So retaining flexibility in the program on a year-to-year basis may be a long-term strategy that's productive for you.
Excellent.
Can I?
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. Just in listening to the comments that were being made, I think I agree with you, Mr. Harris-Dawson, is that there's been some difficulty in providing permanent supportive housing because people don't want it, right? I mean, we've had the NIMBYism, and so if we have affordable housing and housing for homeless compete, the permanent supportive housing would very rarely, if ever, I mean, they're going to be at a disadvantage. Or if we do the annual plan, it's always easier to get the low-hanging fruit, which is we will be difficult to get to the homeless component and not the affordable housing. The higher AMI will be easier to cite, will be easier to provide. So I'm concerned that if we leave it broad and for everybody, that it's going to be the higher AMI that continues to get provided and the very low AMI that doesn't get provided. But perhaps in listening to this, perhaps what we can do is do a percentage as we move forward of different AMI categories. And if our priority is permanent supportive housing, perhaps that gets the majority of it. And if the idea is to eventually, once we get enough permanent supportive housing, start sliding and scale down from that, that we leave a percentage of a higher AMI in there, and I don't know what that is. But to have them compete, the higher AMI would always, I mean, they're going to have an advantage over the lower AMI.
Right. So I think one of the things you want to think about, that if you add percentages to the ballot language, then if things change, you're still basically restricted by those percentages. The other thing that I think we want to think about is there's a movement now to really blend permanent and affordable housing so that we're not having 100% permanent supportive housing projects. That's not really the ideal project. And so I think as the city moves and all developers are moving to that model to really blend chronic and other type of homeless individuals or other type of affordable units, that we may be able to solve that problem. So you're not having 100% permanent supportive housing projects.
Thank you, Mr. Huizar. I mean, I think it's an interesting challenge because I agree with Mr. Huizar's analysis that, you know, when you just go project for project, the project with the least poorest people wins. And so I just wonder if there's a way for us to be creative to make sure that, in other words, I don't want anything that makes it so we have to spend this minimum on permanent supportive housing, and then it turns out we get resources from somewhere else. Like, I don't want to glut the market with permanent supportive housing. At the same time, part of the reason we're in the situation we're in is we have sort of a market free-for-all, right? Whatever gets the sort of most support wins, and so I feel like we're kind of stuck in these two categories where, I mean, my read of this, you could walk away from this with no permanent supportive housing right at this moment. And I know that's not anybody's intention, but from my read of history, when you leave holes like that, that's what you come up with, because the pressure is in the other direction. So, you know, again, I want to be supportive of what's before us today, but I would love everybody, including my colleagues on the Homelessness and Poverty Committee and Housing and all the rest of them, to help us think that out. Because I really, really worry that we'll end up, you know, we end up spending $1 billion and we still need permanent supportive housing units.
So maybe one of the ways you can address that is to add language that prioritizes permanent supportive housing units within the ballot language, so that that's a priority. And in the annual plan, set the number of units that should be financed annually by the city. I mean, that's one way to address that.
Thank you.
Okay, well, I think this has actually been, and Mr. Huizar and I just, you know, chatted with one another, a very good conversation. I think the key for us is to keep moving forward and taking advantage of every day to fine-tune, you know, this even more, to give our colleagues an opportunity to weigh in and to hear from others. There's a set of, I guess, amendments or suggestions. I'd like to alter that a bit and adjust the level of the bond to up to 1.1 billion, and where it relates to the appointment process on the Oversight Committee, that should be 4 by the mayor and 3 by the council. In fact, if you could kind of walk us through those amendments, and it's my understanding you have them, Ms. Chavez.
Yes, I do
Or
have.
John, you have them?
Yeah. we
Go
both have
ahead.
them.
Yeah, we both have it.
We can
Go
switch
ahead.
off if you
No,
like.
you
but-
go ahead.
Oh,
You go ahead.
okay.
Or
shall-
give them to Karen. You know what the heck.
So shall I read this into the record then?
Yes, please.
Okay. So the first recommendation would be to request the city attorney with the assistance of the CLA, CAO, and the chair of the Rules, Elections, Intergovernmental Relations and Neighborhoods Committee to prepare the necessary election ordinance and resolutions to place a ballot measure before the voters at the November 8, 2016 general election that would authorize general obligation bonds for homelessness and housing with the following elements. A, an amount not to exceed $1.1 billion with a mix of taxable and non-taxable debt. B, eligible uses would include supportive housing, homeless facilities that include storage, shelters, showers, etc., affordable housing, accessible housing, veterans housing, and associated infrastructure such as utilities, sidewalks, and streets related to the properties and projects that are funded, which may be carried out in partnership with public, private, or nonprofit parties, including but not limited to capital to construct or finance housing development and acquire real property, new acquisition, construction, renovation, or improvements, and housing income level options to live in the housing of extremely low income, 0 to 30, very low income, 31 to 50, and low income, 51 to 80%. And these are percentage of area median income, AMI. C, provide for a robust public oversight committee of 7 members with 4 appointments by the mayor, 1 appointment by the council president, 1 by the council president pro tem, and 1 appointment by the council assistant president pro tem.
But that's what I changed. We're going to have 4 by the mayor and just 3 by the council.
2, 3. Okay.
Okay.
There we go. We got 3. D, establish an administrative oversight committee comprised of the mayor, the CAO, and the CLA, or their designees. E, require an annual allocation plan to be submitted by the Public Oversight Committee to the Administrative Oversight Committee on April 1st of each year, beginning in 2018, and adopted by the City Council and Mayor prior to the beginning of each fiscal year. F, bonds are to be issued as needed and expended based on an allocation plan that includes an annual allocation plan to determine funding priorities and awards, as well as an annual audit conducted by the controller. Bonds are to be administered by the CAO, and programs are to be administered by the Housing Community Investment Department or other departments as designated by the Council and Mayor, with oversight by the Citizens Oversight Committee and Administrative Oversight Committee. And H, bond proceeds must not supplant existing resources dedicated to the development or finance of supportive or affordable housing, including facilities for the homeless, such as storage, shelters, showers, etc. The second item is to request the city attorney with assistance of CLA, CAO, and the chair of the Rules, Elections, Intergovernmental Relations, Neighborhoods Committee to prepare an amendment to recommendation number 1 that would add an additional eligible use for a first-time home buyer assistance program not to exceed 10% of the total proceeds with an income range up to 100% of AMI. The third item is to request the city attorney with the assistance of the CLA, CAO, and chair of the Rules Committee to prepare the necessary election ordinance and resolution to place a ballot measure before the voters at the November 8, 2016 general election that would authorize a parcel tax for homelessness, services, and housing. A, the amount of the tax would be $80 million annually based on a per parcel tax with a July 1, 2027 sunset clause. Eligible uses would include all of the elements listed in the Comprehensive Homeless Strategy and amendments, as well as supportive housing, homeless facilities such as storage, shelters, showers, etc., affordable housing, accessible housing, veterans housing, and associated infrastructure such as utilities, sidewalks, and streets related to the properties and projects which may be carried out in partnership with public, private, or nonprofit parties, including but not limited to capital to construct or finance housing development and acquire real property, new acquisition, construction, renovation, or improvements, and housing income level options to live in the housing of extremely low income, very low income, and low income, with the associated area median incomes associated with those. C, provide for a robust public oversight committee of 7 members with 4 appointments by the mayor, 1 appointment by the council
No,
president.
we want to make it uniform with the housing bond, so 4 by the mayor,
Exactly.
3 by the council.
C, D, and E are uniform with the housing bond. F, tax proceeds would be expended annually. That's consistent with the GEO bond. As are the other elements. On H, the housing programs would be administered by the Housing Community Investment Department and other departments as designated by council. Since there would not be bonds, it would not be necessary to have the CAO administer that revenue. And then I, tax proceeds must not supplant existing sources as with the GEO bond. And that's the amendment.
Mr. Weezer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So as written here, nothing would prevent us from eventually adopting by full council next week that a majority of this funding go to address the needs of the chronic homelessness, correct?
Correct.
Because the way it's worded right now, it kind of outlines that the money is going to housing income levels, and it says 1, 0 to 30 MI, 3150, 5180, but it doesn't really.
It does not prioritize among those categories.
It does not prioritize now. You just kind of put it all out there. Yes. So if we want to assure that this money is going to supportive housing, would we need language in here to say that that supportive housing would include services like mental health treatment and health care, drug and alcohol treatment, education and job training? Do we need that language in this now? Or housing that will provide these additional services?
So I think on the eligible uses, you may want to say that priority would go to supportive housing, something like that, or that eligible uses would prioritize permanent supportive housing units.
Okay, we're not there yet. As discussed, next week we're going to decide that. But if we want to make it more explicit that we want to provide these types of services, I mean, supportive housing, people would assume it includes that, but do we have to be more explicit here to say that it's going to provide these services? Just
so
to be, or at what point for the ballot language do we need to provide that language?
Right. So on the GEO bond, so you can use GEO bond proceeds for services. Yeah. On the parcel tax language, I think you just want to be clear, and I think it states that you would be providing services.
I get that, but by the time we put this on the ballot, I'm not sure if the recommendation we're doing today for this to get to the city attorney's office to draft the language, should we include language in here now that supportive housing, because we want that to be explicit for the voters to see, that supportive housing means assistance with mental health treatment, health care, drug and alcohol treatment, education, and job training. Is this the point to do it, or we do it at the final voting council next week?
Yeah, I think you should direct the city attorney to draft that specific language in terms of that supportive housing means housing with services.
And do we do that here now, or when in our process?
You can do it now, or you can do it by in council, whichever location, but you need it before council acts at the end of the day.
Okay.
That's right.
I got it.
The city attorney might be able to draft, I don't want to speak for them, but they could probably draft it both ways so that you could have it, have that option.
Why don't we just make that request now, and then we would like to ask for input from the CAO's office, the CLA's office as well. But if we could direct, I see Harit, to look at being a little more specific where it relates to that language, because even though we don't have to do it today, it would be good to have it by Tuesday.
Yes.
So that when we have this conversation with the rest of the council, we have, options of language or specific language. So that makes an awful lot of sense to me.
Thank you. The point being that wherever we say we're going to provide supportive housing, that we explicitly state supportive housing, that the bond funds will provide will include services such as mental health treatment and health care, drug and alcohol treatment, education, and job training. Thank you.
Okay. So then I don't see any other questions. So with Mr. Harris Dawson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to take a minute before we vote to thank you, Mr. Chair, for helping guide this process to this point. and also the vice chair, and he started with me as co-chair of the Homelessness and Poverty Committee, Councilmember Jose Huizar, who pushes on this almost every time I see him. And so I think we're very, very close to the finish line, so I just wanted to publicly acknowledge the work of the folks on our committee and Mr. Huizar.
And I want to acknowledge the work of the Homelessness and Poverty Committee as well. And that's why I think that it's so important that we act today. I think that in acting today, and then if we bring this before the council on Tuesday, it still gives us a few extra days. And that's why I said opening up that every minute, every day is important. So that's why I think let's get this out there, get it out there in some form, in some shape, so that we can begin to get input, feedback. So if there are no other questions where it relates to this, then without objection, we'll adopt the recommendations with the amendments. Good enough, Mr. Clerk?
Yes.
All right. Thank you. So let's move to item 3. Okay, I have, where's Ms. Norton? Brenna, I'm going to let you come up now. And I want to ask, Ms. Conway, was this your issue as well? I lost you. I don't see you in the crowd. Elizabeth Conway, was it? Which item? Oh, your next one. Okay. So let's get Ms. Norton, followed by Mr. Previn, followed by Sarah Rascone. Please come forward.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Mr. Chair, would you like the item read into the record?
Please.
Item number 3 is a communication from the city attorney, resolutions and ordinance relative to submitting to the voters a proposed charter amendment to change various aspects of the governance, management, oversight, and operations of the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, and calling a special election on the measure and consolidating it with the state general election to be held on November 8th, 2016.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Good morning. Brenna Norton with Food and Water Watch, speaking on behalf of our 80,000 members approximately across Los Angeles. I appreciate all the work the council members and mayor have done on this. There are some good things in this reform package. But let me ask you to reflect. Do you want to be the council today which paved the way for DWP to potentially privatize part of the utility and provide less oversight over power contracts? Because let's be clear, in all due respect, that is what the oversight portion of this proposal would do today. We provided some amendments to the council member and mayor's office, and I do not see them covered in the suggested amendments. On power, this language could undermine badly needed efforts to improve the ways DWP sources its power. We need council oversight, and city council oversight as it now goes to the Energy and Environment Committee. We cannot put this entirely on appointed board members who are not accountable to voters. On water privatization concerns, it's rare that cities today privatize their entire utility. What is happening all across the country is cities are using contracts to privatize part of their services. So to wrap up, it's reasonable to give construction contracts.
Thank you, Ms. Norton. Thank you. Mr. Previn, followed by Ms. Rascone.
Thank you, Council President Wesson. You made some red line copies, I assume Clark or one of the attorneys did, and they have done an excellent job of kind of circling it back to council authority. I think term is nicely, per the charter, which means that, of course, you could change that. I think the authority in a couple different places that I looked, this is just on the one copy, the do not mutilate or take it and read it copy. So I have not had a real chance to look. The one comment that I'll just make in the last 5 seconds is that for a commission like this, I think, and also you've deferred the compensation idea until later, which I thought we agreed should be very ordinary and traditional. But nonetheless, what is needed is independence, sir. And I'm just not sure we have that with the 4 from the mayor, 3 from the council. I just wish that there was a sense that the ratepayers felt that there was an individual who had some of the experience but really had a set of fresh eyes. So thank you.
Thank you. So, Ms. Rascone, please come forward.
Good morning, Sarah Rascone, and on behalf of over 1,650 business organizations employing more than 650,000 people in the LA County region, the LA Chamber of Commerce supports governance reform to the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power Utility. DWP is currently
Mr. Clerk,
bound.
to time. Go ahead.
DWP is currently bound to city rules and practices that prevent it from operating at its highest efficiency. We're very supportive of the procurement and contracting language that has come about. We appreciate the proposed changes on hiring, but would like to see a more thorough solution addressing the limitations of the civil service system when it comes to filling the department's positions requiring expertise. At this point, we have concerns about the creation of a new entity, the DWP Analyst Office, that could create more bureaucracy and divert funds from aging infrastructure at a time when we are raising rates. Lastly, we suggest 5-year board terms rather than 3 or 4 to maintain board stability and expertise within the board. Governance reform would be a powerful statement to LA residents and the business community. Thank you.
Thank you. So that's the last card I have on item 3. Want to start this out by having Mr. Fuentes come forward. No, you're good. Okay, so let's get our department people to come forward. We want to thank all of the city. If we could have quiet. In fact, I think that's my office making all of that noise. Okay, so I want to thank everybody who worked on this. In particular, I want to thank Mr. Fuentes. I want to thank the participation from the mayor. And I want to thank the very robust participation from the neighborhood councils. Being the committee that works with and oversees the neighborhood councils, we're very proud of their involvement, and we hope the way that we handled this issue will become the norm and not the exception in the future where it relates to substantive changes. I want to also recognize the work from Dr. Pickles' office, who's been with us every step of the way. I think I indicated early on that there's something in this for everyone, and I'm very proud of the work product that we have produced. So are there any, I think we have some recommended clarification amendments. Would you like to walk through or would you walk through those for us?
Harith Trivedi from the City Attorney's Office. Just to frame the discussion really quickly, pursuant to the Council's direction in June 7th, we prepared for you today the ballot resolutions and election ordinance necessary to place a charter amendment on the November 8th, 2016 ballot that would change various aspects of the governance, management, oversight, and operations of the Department of Water and Power. We've included a detailed document indicating the specific changes to the charter language, and that can be found at attachment 2 to our transmittal. The proposed changes before you track very specifically the recommendations of the council made on June 7th. And I also want to note that the transmittal is limited to the charter amendment to meet election deadlines. Our office and other affected departments will respond to the ordinances and other requests separately at a later date. There are several amendments recommended by the committee that I could read into the record here to amend the language that was transmitted to you for this meeting. The first is to amend section 678A, lines 7 and 8 of the attachment regarding the candidates to the appointment of the general manager to the Water and Power Department, to say the candidates of the Board of Water and Power Commissioners, which shall provide then a list of up to 3 recommended candidates, and that occurs again in lines 9 and 10 of 678 in attachment 2. So it would be a list of up to 3 candidates, not 3 candidates to the mayor. The third amendment is to amend 678B5 regarding the monthly billing cycle to say, to the effect, implement the monthly billing cycle and provide daily water usage data to the Bureau of Sanitation beginning no later than July 1, 2020, unless a later date or different cycle is prescribed by ordinance. D, add a sentence to 674A1B regarding power contracts to say that the board shall notify the council and the mayor of any proposed contracts for the term of longer than 30 years prior to board action. And finally, E, to amend section 1025B3 to eliminate a typo in that section so that it should read, or in part, in whole or in part, to the Board of Water and Power Commissioners. I can answer any questions. However, we've detailed all of our changes and all of the charter language in our report that we transmitted to the council, and it essentially reflected the recommendations of this committee with some organizational and clarification changes that were necessary to effectuate the intent and the specific direction of council.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Any questions, members? And if there are no questions, then without objection, I would recommend that we adopt the city attorney report, resolutions, and the ordinance as amended. So ordered. Thank you so very much. Is there any other business where it relates to this special agenda?
No, sir.
So why don't we adjourn this and we'll go into the regular.
I just wanted to take a minute. We've been joined in the chamber by the President of the California State Assembly and one of our local members of the California State Assembly, State Senator Kevin De Leon and State Senator Isidore Hall are in the house. Let's give them a big LA City Council welcome.
Well, thank you, and they're here to make a very important announcement in just a few minutes, and it's good to see our colleague